Well, hello there, watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the associate editor of the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and the columnist for the Daily Mail, Sarah Vine. Welcome to both of you. So, front pages, as ever, let's kick off with those. The Guardian has news of the first joint strikes over pay by nurses and ambulance staff, which will be taking place next month, a move it describes as unprecedented. The Metro mocks the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, over a video he made trying to explain inflation using coffee cups, taking their inspiration from Rowan Atkinson. They call him Mr. Coffee Bean. The businessman Sir James Dyson writes in The Telegraph, insisting that Rishi Sunak's fiscal policies have left Britain in a state of COVID inertia. In the Daily Mail, Tory MPs are warning the Chancellor that if he doesn't cut taxes, he'll lose them the next general election. The Financial Times has details of Sir Keir Starmer's trip to the World Economic Forum at Davos, where he is said to be pitching himself and Labour as an alternative to the current government. The Express reports that King Charles has gifted to the nation the sum of £250 million from an offshore wind farm deal, which he wants to be used for what he calls the wider public good. The Eye has seen figures suggesting that all but 100th of 1% of court warrants to forcibly install energy prepayment meters in people's homes are approved without scrutiny. The Star gives us a piece of its mind, reacting angrily to advice from the head of the Food Standards Agency that people shouldn't bring cake to the office. And finally, with a headline to suit, The Sun has the latest on the Gary Lineker studio prank, where his voice was drowned out by decidedly adult sound effects, as you probably know. Anyway, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out those front pages for yourself while you watch our guests. So let's go straight to them. Kevin Maguire and Sarah Vine. Nearly every newspaper with a different headline there, Sarah. But The Guardian picking up on the news that we're going to have this enormous strike of health service staff, with ambulance crews now joining nurses. If you thought Feb the 1st was big, then look out for Feb the 6th, effectively.
Yes, no, they're doubling down, aren't they? And I think the thing is that the government are trying to sort of push through legislation to stop services being suspended when these strikes happen. And I think they're not really helping themselves by doing this. I mean, doing it together just makes it much worse for the public generally. I think it's probably not a very good idea. I think it's quite a bad move on their part, because I think it will not play well with members of the public who have been quite sympathetic generally to both nurses and ambulance drivers. But if they both go on strike together, then, the risk of people dying is actually quite high.
Well, The Guardian suggesting between 30,000 and 40,000 nurses in England and Wales had already been due to stage the 5th one-day stoppage of their campaign on the 6th. But the GMB now announcing more than 10,000 paramedics, call handlers and other ambulance staff will join on the same date. It does feel like it will begin to grind to a halt at that point, Kevin, with, it seems, Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, suggesting that 10% is unacceptable. That had been the sort of halfway house that the Royal College of Nursing had proffered.
Yeah, well, Steve Barclay could halt these strikes immediately, Health Secretary, by starting negotiations rather than having his megaphone figures that he shouts out. Those figures of nurses, about 500,000 nurses, aren't they? So there's very few. So certainly any minimum standards will certainly be met, and ambulance crews do that too. But I'm surprised in many ways that unions haven't coordinated action in the past. And you can see they're beginning to do that now, particularly on February the 1st, which is against the sack key workers bill. Which is what the government's pushing through, really, with its minimum standards, when you will have rail workers and you will have civil servants, you will have university lecturers and some others. So these strikes are going to get worse. Teachers have voted to join in England, already been striking in Scotland. And the government's got to enter negotiations. It's the only way to do it. And as it stands off and just shouts, it's going to get worse. It's just got to enter negotiations. And as Sarah herself has said in recent weeks, it's incredible they haven't negotiated with the nurses in particular. I mean, I've never come across, and I've been covering employment relations, disputes at work for more than 30 years. I've never come across a group of employers, the government, that are so boneheaded and stubborn on this and inflaming the situation instead of trying to find ways forward and looking for common ground.
Well, we know that each percentage point that's given is hugely costly. they also suggest it is inflationary. And it is to the economy we go next. I mean, as I said, every newspaper got a different headline. Inflation creeping down, Sarah, but the problem is growth is too, which is what is picked up on by the very rich Sir James Dyson, who's writing in The Telegraph, suggesting that the short-sighted and stupid economic approach of Rishi Sunak's government is keeping Britain in a state of what he called COVID inertia. This is a section of the press preview which feels like Trussonomics is back. Anyway, tell us more.
Well, I think it feels. I mean, I think if you sort of ally that to other front pages, such as the Mail today, my paper, there's clearly a sort of resurgence of Trussonomics and this idea that we need to introduce tax cuts. There's pressure on Rishi from the right of the party and from the Truss fans. It's a really difficult balancing act for them because inflation has been a huge problem, but it is coming down. I mean, inflation was largely due to external pressures, and the fact that it's coming down is also largely due to external pressures, really. So the fact is that they've got to find a way through. But I do think this is this awful thing with the Tory party, which is that it just can't resist the desire to eat itself. I don't understand why they, steady as she goes, they're not doing too badly with Rishi, and there's this sort of resurgence of the right. It's just going to stir up this hornet's nest. That's what James. I mean, there are a lot of people like James Dyson who are very wealthy and who are very good at making money, and we do need that in this country. Of course, we need growth, and of course, we need incentives. But this is a balancing act, and the whole point of this period is to try and stabilise after what happened with Truss's budget, which was not very long ago, and quite disastrous, really.
Well, indeed. Yes, the Telegraph quoting him as suggesting that growth has become a dirty word, that the burden of regulations and increased business taxes means that they're effectively penalising the private sector as a free win at the ballot box. You mentioned the Mail, Sarah. Cut taxes or lose the election, the Tories are warned. And yet the mood music is almost like bring back the national insurance increase to pay for social care and the health service. Anyway, Kevin, where are we at politically with this argument then?
Yeah, Dyson, who's a big Brexiteer, patriotically moved to Singapore for a while, didn't he? A lower tax regime. I think he's back now for tax reasons. It's also said in Westminster, I'm sure it's untrue, that he wants a peerage. So you need to be back. I'm sure that's just scandalous chit-chat.
I can't believe you said that, Kevin. That's just a lie, obviously.
I mean, it's appalling, isn't it, that people do
Terrible.
Terrible. It's never happened before. But you can see on the right of the Conservative Party, there is a group, and they were largely Truss fans, the Kamikaze Squad, who saw the economy crash. There was a 30 billion bill put on that by I think it was the Resolution Foundation. We saw interest rates go up and so on. That are still pushing those policies. And everybody would like to pay less tax, there's no question. It's gone up to a 70-year high, which I wouldn't have expected under the Conservatives, the total. And as the Mail say, cut taxes or lose the election. Tories won. Well, if Sunak's going to cut taxes, are they saying increase borrowing? Because there was a time that borrowing was a fetish of the Conservative Party, certainly the David Cameron and George Osborne time, when it was all about getting down, they didn't. It went up quite considerably, certainly in cash terms. But you can see this big row within the governing UK Conservative Party. And Rishi Sunak, whatever you might think of him, I think he's got almost an impossible job now, because I don't believe his party wants to be led. It's everybody's just going their own way, and that will create huge problems for him and them come the election.
Well, I mean, can I just...
Yeah, go for it, sorry.
No, I was just going to say we've got Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves in Davos, selling themselves as the next government. I mean, one thing that I think is certain, that if we do have a Labour government, then there's no chances of taxes coming down. It's just going to go the other way. So, I think the Tories need to be a bit careful about this, because what they don't want to do is to create a situation where they're unelectable again, and then the person who really will tank the economy gets in.
Yes, and she's laughing.
Sorry,
just worth noting that a shrinking workforce affects growth, but obviously high inflation has tempted some early retirees back into the workforce, and the government under Mel Stride is certainly working to work out why so many have left the workforce. In the meantime, who wants to reflect on the Daily Mirror? Well, actually, Kevin, you do it. It's your paper. Simon Clarke as making the front page of your paper. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, another Brexiteer. He was chief secretary in the Treasury when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor. I think he was briefly levelling up secretary. I'm trying to remember now. There's been so many changes in the cabinet, but he's basically saying, look, nurses, they shouldn't need to use food banks. That's probably right, but some aren't paid enough. And then if you have a high mortgage, rent, you have to pay for car parking at your hospital in England when you go to work. You have other issues, and most of them are paid less than 31,000. They do, and hospitals have set up food banks themselves. So him saying, "Well, budget better," well, I mean, it's probably all right for him because he must be getting on for 3 times what a nurse earns. So I think every time somebody speaks out, and he's on the right, he's part of the Liz Truss kamikaze squad. Every time a Tory speaks out like this, I think they just make themselves appear tin-eared, and they distance the UK Conservative Party from the public as a whole. It does them no good whatsoever.
OK, yes. 7 weeks in the job as a levelling up secretary, so your memory served you well at that point. In the meantime, you mentioned Sir Keir Starmer heading to Davos, pitching himself as the alternative, as you might expect. Is it intriguing that he and the Shadow Chancellor are heading there, and yet the British PM and the UK Chancellor are not, Sarah? Does that matter?
I think Rishi would argue that he's got too much going on at home to go swanning around Davos. Which there was a brilliant story about Davos this week about the number of escorts who turn up there during the summit. Apparently, it's a very lucrative period in their careers. So it's not and Davos is generally thought of as basically a lot of swanning around. I mean, I think what's interesting about him going to Davos and the things that he said is this idea of rejoining the EU, which I think is something that he's saying it's not what he wants, but I mean, he's definitely talking about getting closer again. And I think that voters will have to. He's got to play quite a careful game here, because obviously he doesn't want to alienate the blue, red, whatever colour it is now, wall, who voted very strongly for Brexit. But he is nevertheless saying that he wants to strengthen ties. So that's quite interesting. I think we should watch that quite carefully.
Kevin, your thoughts?
Yeah, I remember John McDonnell when he was Shadow Chancellor, Labour Shadow Chancellor, and he was Jeremy Corbyn's chief lieutenant. He went to Davos. I am surprised Hunt isn't going. I can understand why Sunak isn't, but I'm very surprised. They've left it open to Starmer and Reeves. They'll do a lot of glad handing, a lot of rubbing of shoulders, and it'll probably do them some good. They will begin to get taken seriously. And the problem, I think, for the Conservatives is it looks as if they're giving up and being edged out, while you've got this eager Labour team who are over there talking to other leaders and industrialists and movers and shakers. Many of them you wouldn't like, or I wouldn't like anyway. But nevertheless, I can see why Starmer and Reeves are doing it. And the government, I think, is a bit foolish to give them a free run.
Yeah, and
I think Kevin's right about that.
Yeah, and a very proficient performance from Sir Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's Questions today as well. But I suppose Rishi Sunak still hasn't done very many of them. Learning on the job at that, I guess. Anyway, lots more still to come. The story kicked off last night, of course. Should we have our cake and eat it at the office? We'll take a bite out of that story, as does the Daily Star. Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, Kev Maguire and Sarah Vine. And Kevin, let's go to the Eye. I think the second day they've led on this story, The Guardian also reporting on it. This idea about prepayment meters and how damaging they are. So what's the detail in this one?
No, it's absolutely scandalous that when power companies apply for warrants to have forced entry into a home to put in a prepayment meter, they're just waved through. They say in the Eye, figures show 99.99% are way through. Only 72 of 534,000 requests in court were actually stopped, and huge batches of these requests are way through. This is terrible. for families, because you end up paying more and you have the continual worry of whether you been to a shop or a supermarket or online to make sure you have the credits to keep the lights on, keep the heating on, have hot water, be able to cook. There is no scrutiny. All the power is in the hands of the electricity and gas companies. And I remember one of Sarah's friends, she was talking about it recently. Came across her, and Sarah tried to intervene and just got nowhere. You're banging your head against a brick wall, weren't you? And imagine people who don't have anyone to represent them, anyone powerful with a platform, they just get hammered.
They're so rapacious, these companies. They're so rapacious. And the thing is, in my friend's case, it all happened so quickly. She didn't really understand what was going on. She had a dispute with her supplier. She'd been paying one company. They weren't, I mean, it was all very complicated. And before she knew it, this guy was at her door demanding access to her house with a warrant, and there wasn't anything she could do about it. And she got me, who's probably one of the bossiest people in England, to try and sort it out. And even I couldn't get to any of them. Yeah. And it was awful. And the thing is that a lot of the people that this is happening to are not people who are, bossy middle-class ladies like me, who can sort of ring up and shout at people. And, it's happening to people who are already struggling with this kind of stuff, and they're tired and they're worn out and they're a bit confused, and it's awful. It's really rapacious. Mm. And as you say, Kevin, it ends up costing more. So you end up with the people who can afford it less paying the most for their energy.
Well, it's starting to be raised in Parliament now, isn't it? And actually, I just see on the front page of the Eye, Katie Ball's writing in the Eye, Trussites are plotting and the PM risks losing control of his party. And it was the return of Trussonomics, which we talked about at the start of the programme. In the meantime, quick word on the Daily Star. I have to admit, when I saw this story yesterday, I immediately thought about Boris Johnson and office cakes. I don't know why, but anyway, there we are. Let us eat cake. Number 10 officially urges us to ignore a health chief's no cakes at work advice. Sarah.
I'm very much in favour of cake at work. I mean, what else is there? You're sitting there. And although I have to say, when I first became a journalist, I did become inordinately fat almost immediately on account of all the cakes at work. So I think the woman has a point, because you're doing a sedentary job most of the time, and unless you're unless you're someone who's doing manual labour, then you probably don't need to be consuming an extra sort of 600 calories at tea time.
OK, I've got no time. Thumbs up or thumbs down from you, Kevin? We've run out of time.
Okay. Kevin looks like he never eats cake. He looks like he just exists on kale.
Look at him. Exactly. Anyway, Kevin and Sarah, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you.